The other misconception is that, again, in the law enforcement context, that U.S. law treats EU citizens differently than U.S. citizens. I think that this misconception stems from a reading of the Privacy Act, as I said, which does apply to U.S. persons, which are defined as U.S. citizens and permanent resident aliens of the United States. And the Privacy Act does not apply to non-U.S. persons. And I think the concern in the European Union, from what we've heard, is that, in particular, EU citizens would not get the right to access their data, because the Privacy Act provides for access, and would not have the right to correct their data, because the Privacy Act provides the right of correction, and would not have the right to judicial redress to enforce those rights, because the Privacy Act provides for judicial redress. In the law enforcement context, the Privacy Act exempts all data collected for law enforcement purposes from those three provisions of the Privacy Act: the access, correction, and judicial redress. And so US citizens are in the same position as EU citizens are in the law enforcement context under the Privacy Act with respect to those three provisions I just mentioned, which are the three that are the subject of all the discussion with the European Union about the application of the Privacy Act. It's very similar, almost identical to the EU framework decision, which also derogates from the same rights in the EU in the law enforcement context, and for obvious reasons. And this is something that we've talked about recently in our discussions with our European colleagues. And similarly, under the EU framework decision, there is no, because the individual has no right to get access to his or her records, the individual cannot review the records himself or herself to determine whether there's an error in those records. And the same situation exists in the United States. EU citizens and US citizens, neither of them can get access to criminal investigatory records. Nor can US citizens or EU citizens go to court to get their criminal investigatory records. It's just not provided, that opportunity.